everybody, welcome back. This is part 6 now of the Revell Flower Class build in 1/44 scale. Last week, if you watched part 5, you'll know that I finished the funnel and funnel base with the signals platform as well. And this week I want to finish off the main superstructure elements of the kit with this deck house here on the quarterdeck. And I want to get that built because I want to see how it fits in relation to the funnel base here. Because the funnel base overhangs the forecastle brake and sits on top of the deck of this superstructure that I'm going to build this week. And before I go ahead and do any painting, I want to make sure that that's all going to go together without any major gaps or any problems. So we'll see how that goes. There's only 4 Revell parts to be dealing with in this part of the build. All the rest is Pontos etch brass and turn brass. So we'll get straight over to the bench and get the Revell parts cut out and let's see what we've got to do with the Pontos set. Okay, so these are the Pontos instructions for the superstructure that we're doing in this episode. So this large deck house that goes aft on the quarterdeck. And it's just 4 Revell parts to start off with, and we're going to have to do a little bit of preparation with these parts. So the red on the Pontos instructions tell us where to cut the plastic away. So that's the first job for today. We'll get that ready and this deck house glued up. Not much to clear on this. Sometimes when using a chisel blade, it's easy to dig into the plastic, which is what I've done there. So I've got a little gouge in it, but we'll just repair that with some Mr. Surfacer. This is the Mr. Surfacer 500, so that's quite thick. So just let that dry off and sand it down. But as I said, it's quite difficult sometimes to get a perfectly clean cut with a chisel blade. It's easy to get it to dig in. Okay, so that's all the parts for this deck house cleared, ready for assembly and ready for the Pontos parts. So that can go together now. So I'll use some Tamiya extra thin quick setting for this. Pontos don't tell us to remove this moulding here. It's actually just the ship's nameplate, and Pontos re-provide that in brass, so I'm going to remove that anyway whilst I'm just smoothing the side down here. Okay, so that'll do for the moment. I've got some filling to do just around the edges. I don't want any gaps around the bulkheads at the top where it meets this deck, but it's gone together reasonably well. There's quite a bit of flash on these Revell parts, which I'll just clean up as well, but it's going to need a test fit against the forward superstructure that we built last week. So I'll just get the model over and we'll just have a look how that fits together with the superstructure that we built last week. Okay, so these I think are going to need joining at this stage, but I'll just check the fit first. So the funnel base, which is this part here, as you can see, it overlaps onto the deck of this deck house that we've just put together. But the fit is actually quite good, so I thought for a moment that I was going to have to glue this plastic to this deck and fill round the back, but it's actually not going to need that. The fit's good enough to assemble separately. I'll maybe just reduce the bottom here at the front. And that's just to make sure that the deck here at this point is perfectly level. Okay, so I think they'll go together all right. I don't have to assemble those together at this stage. So I can carry on with this build knowing that the funnel base is going to fit on alright when it comes to assembling all these structures. Okay, so I'll fill the gaps on this part now, just to get it how I want it. Not too much to do, it's just the join around the top here that needs tidying up a little bit. And that's another job for the Mr. Surfacer 500. So I'll just brush that round the join, and it's thick enough to hold up, and we'll just have to sand that down a little bit. The other thing I'm going to do at this stage whilst I'm filling is to fill the holes in the plastic where we're supposed to be fitting the Revell railings, and we don't need those, so I'll fill them in and I'll re-drill them a little bit smaller when we're ready to fit the Pontos railings. So this is a bit of Mr. White putty, dries nice and hard and fairly quickly, so it will make short work of these little holes. So that's all the filling done. I'll leave that for an hour or so and then come back and clean up all the filler, and hopefully we'll be able to start fitting some of the etched brass parts. Okay, so we'll just clean this up now. All the fillers dried. So we'll start to put some of the brass on this now. So I'll probably start from the front here, and the first thing to do is to put some braces on the underside of this platform. So there are two of these either side. We just have these triangular supports to go underneath this platform extension, which is for the ladder, I think. So I'll just fix that with a bit of thin super glue. Just make sure it's square. And then these flanges go on the outside. I'll reinforce all this with some extra thin super glue when we've got everything in position. So now that they're in position, I can just add a bit of super thin. This will just wick into the joins and make sure that they're nice and strong. But with super thin super glue, I'd advise using one of these applicators just to make sure that you don't get the glue everywhere. But it's good stuff. This will wick in because it's so thin, it just wicks into all the joins and seals them up. You get a really good bond with it. Next we have this, and I'm not at all sure what this is for. But it has to be folded, and Pontos supply 4 of them on the frets, part 5 or 6, but it only shows the location for one of them somewhere here on the bulkhead. So I'm not quite sure what they're about really. There might be some sort of vent, but I'm not certain. Anyway, we'll try and bend them up. So they form kind of a basket, like a hollow basket. But if anybody knows what they are, just put a comment down below, because I haven't got a clue what those are. But anyway, we'll put them on. So they go somewhere like that. It doesn't tell us anything about fitting them to the other side, but I'm going to have to guess that they do go either side. So I'll do a mirror image. Next we have these parts, which are representing some sort of box with a pipe or a pair of pipes running from it. So we just fold that up. I could just do with a touch of glue just to hold it together. The problem with all these assemblies is that Pontos don't give us the starboard side. So I'm just assuming, possibly dangerously, that these parts were fitted to both sides of the ship. So I may be wrong, but they do give us 2. So I'm assuming that that's right. So next I'm going to make the davits. So we've 4 to make, 2 for either side. And these will need soldering, so I'll get the iron on. So the first thing I'll do is fold the main davit part, which is this. So that just goes back on itself like that. And I'll just put a little bit of flux on the inside face here. And can just hold that together and just get a little bit of solder on the outside face like that, and that's just enough to hold it together. That's all it needs. Okay, so that's the 4 main parts of the davits. We've got a little bit more to do though yet. We've got these other parts to fit. These strips are designed to fit on the inside face like that. So we'll try and get them soldered. I think they do need soldering really, they're not going to hold up otherwise, I don't think. So I'm not going to be putting a lot of solder on these, just a little bit on the end, just to hold this end in place. And then a little bit more down at the bottom here. So that's the whole thing, and I'll just give that a clean up with the fiberglass pencil. So that's the davit with the front flange fitted onto it. So it was a little bit easier than I thought actually. I always struggle with those thin strips of brass. Okay, so that's the davits fitted. There's just an extra little part on the forward davit on either side, which is this, and I think it's a type of support. It's just like a bit of a crutch for whatever was slung on these davits. So I think there are some pads there at the end. So that's a nice little detail on that, and I've fitted the tackle as well, which was easy enough to do. So that's the davits finished. Next we've got a couple of what look like lockers which fit next to the davits. Perhaps they kept the tackle and stuff in there. So I'll make those up next. So these are just a simple box to fold up. So that folds up quite nicely, and all I want to do with these is just add a tiny touch of solder just to hold it together. So just a little bit on the side and the front edge, and it just needs to be the smallest amount just to hold the box together. Just along the edge like that. And obviously if you get it in a position where it wants to be, then just hold it there and get the solder on before it opens up again. Okay, so with that folded and just cleaned up a little bit, I can fit it to the bulkhead. So they go just ahead of the davits. Just to finish these lockers off, there are some small brackets to be fitted on the underside. These little triangular pieces. I'm not sure they're going to be that visible, but they're easy enough to fit. The slope of the deck on this part is a bit deceiving really, because it makes it hard to line up some of these parts. The positioning of them is actually along a horizontal line rather than following the bottom of the bulkhead there. So it's easy to fall into the trap of aligning everything with the bottom of the bulkhead. So it's just something to be careful of. All these little details, they look really insignificant when you put them on individually, but I think sometimes with this brass it's the overall effect. It makes the assembly just look busy, and it doesn't really focus you down on the individual details. It's the overall impression that I think is what people notice with them. And with those located, I'll just put a spot of the extra thin glue on. That'll just seal it all up. We have some booms that fit to the corner of this bulkhead. It covers these riggles, so before I do the boom work, I'll put the replacement riggles on. These parts are all for the boom brackets, and we need the pair of booms themselves. So I was just calling this a boom. It's actually a 10 hundredweight derrick, which is this part here. So it lies along the bulkhead like this. And actually there's just one in the kit. All the brackets are provided for both sides, so I'm assuming that this was moved from side to side depending on what work needed to be done on which side of the ship. So we've just got the brackets to fit on the starboard side, and the boom itself will go on the port. So we'll do this one first. Now the Pontos parts have holes already drilled in the ends. This is the pivot end with this turning here, and this takes this pivot. So these usually come like this in the Pontos sets. They need to be folded in half, so back on themselves like that, and then the hole at the back of the Pontos part accepts the pivot. They're sometimes a bit tight, so it's best to use some pliers for forcing that through into the hole. And it's a good enough fit not to need any glue on that. The precision of those Pontos parts always surprises me. The hole is barely noticeable really, but it takes that pivot perfectly without glue. This bracket is bent through 90 degrees and it goes on the corner of the bulkhead, positioned somewhere like this. This is where it's worth getting these corners nice and sharp, so that that part fits nice and tight onto the corner like that. These brackets here then fit on the corner just above that plate. Those brackets need to dry properly before we attempt to fit the derrick. There is a little bit of weight in this brass part, so it will put some strain on those parts. This bracket holds the front of the derrick boom up, so that just slides over the end. I'm not going to glue that at this stage, so hopefully this should drop down into the pivot that we just fitted. Which it does, thank goodness. And then I just need to locate the forward bracket just next to that porthole. And then the last thing for this assembly is to fit the rings at the end. Okay, so that's the derrick boom fitted. Okay, so this side just has the two bare brackets without the boom fitted. which is a bit of a surprise really. I can't understand why you wouldn't have another boom on the starboard side. It can't have added an awful lot of weight to the overall weight of the ship. So a bit of a puzzle, but there's definitely only one in the Pontos set. All we've got on the after bulkhead is a door to refit. We took the plastic moulding off when we were cleaning this Revell part up, so it's time to reinstate it now. And we have some, they look like grab rails, but they're probably for awnings on the back here. So the problem with these railings is that there's so little attachment point for them. They're very thin and there's really nothing for the glue to get hold of. So what I do with parts like this is just leave a little bit of the fret attachment point. I'll leave it on the part that I'm attaching. So that's not what we normally do. We're normally interested in cleaning these parts so that we remove the fret stubs, but these, in this case, it helps us. And leaving them on, we just need to mark a little positioning hole for them on the bulkhead, and that allows the little bit of stub to go into the plastic. So it's not drilling it, I'm just got a sharp needle in there, and that just gives somewhere for the fret stub to go into. So just mark up at both ends and make the mark with that needle, and then hopefully that'll give us something for the glue to work with. And in this case I'm using thick super glue because it just gives a little more time to get those parts into place, and the glue doesn't evaporate as quickly. So that just really does make quite a bit of difference. Just that tiny little pinhole and that small little bit of etch brass fret just enables us to get a better connection point with that part. And for good measure I'll just put a bit of extra thin on as well. That'll just flood into the holes that we've made and really seal that joint up. You can remove some excess with a bit of a tissue there, and that when it's set will be really fairly strong. So that's much better than just positioning the part on the bulkhead. So those railings are really quite secure with those pinholes and the pieces of fret going into them. We obviously don't want to be touching them and messing them about with them because they're still quite fragile, but that's much stronger than just trying to balance the parts onto the bulkhead. Now with this I'm actually going to fit the railings at this stage. I think I'm going to be able to paint this deck and then just touch in the railings afterwards with some white paint. And I'm doing that really because I want these railings to be quite strong, and the lacquer paint that I use is really nice to use brush painted. It doesn't leave any brush marks or anything, so I'm quite happy to go ahead and fit the railings and knowing that I can touch them in quite neatly afterwards. And the other thing is that the railings actually have some more parts added to them. There's some little brackets and things hanging off them. So I think all in all I'd rather get them fitted at this stage. the way I'm going to fit these railings is just to make these holes one at a time. You remember that I filled all the Revell holes, and it's just as well I did, because they're not in the same location as the Pontos brass ones. So those holes do need filling and re-drilling at this stage. So I'll do them one at a time, and I'll glue this railing one stanchion at a time. And doing it like that just makes sure that we've got the new holes at the correct distance. These first three are actually just mirroring the Revell holes. So I'll glue this forward edge of the railing in position. Touch of extra thin just to seal it. And then we can just work along. Just move the stanchion out of the way slightly and make the new holes in the deck. And then just push each stanchion into its hole one by one. By this stage, the Revell holes are about 1 millimetre out of position. So this is obviously a much more accurate way of fitting these rails. So I'll do the starboard side now, and just use the same technique. And obviously there's a piece to go along the back as well. Just on the corner here we've got this assembly, so it's basically a tripod arrangement, and it's described in the Pontos instructions as a derrick davit. So there's a piece of turned brass which goes in the corner, and then some etched brass which forms the tripod leg, and there's one on either side of the superstructure. So the first thing I did was to fit the actual turned brass part, and again I've made a hole in the corner of the deck just to give the part something to grip into. So with both of those tripods in position, I can do the last of the railings. So the shorter one goes to port. I'm not sure really why Pontos didn't give this in one piece, just with a fold at this point, because it's quite a bit more awkward joining those corners like that. So it's a bit of a puzzle. Okay, so put this last piece of railing in. Just trim off the end of the side rails that are just a bit too long. So I've added a few more details. There are these racks at the side. There are 9 of these altogether, and they just were folded in half just to double the thickness of them. And then a really good attachment. They look very fragile, but actually there's a little hook on the top that goes over the top railing, and it's quite a firm attachment point, so we shouldn't have any trouble with those. And there's a couple of little boxes that I've made up as well. I've also gone ahead and built some of the lockers that fit to this deck. They're fairly straightforward, they just need folding up and soldering. So there are 5 there, including this hatch which fits forward like that. But I'll make the other ones up. There are another few bits and pieces to build up, so I'll do those now on camera, and then hopefully we'll be able to get the parts primed, get this whole assembly primed, and see what it looks like back on the ship. Okay, so we'll start with this hatch. I've already made this one up, but there is another one on this deck, so we'll do this one. So we'll get the folds done first, and again I want to get this one done first, otherwise I'm not going to be able to get in. These are pretty awkward where you've got this thin piece of brass. They're very difficult to bend accurately, but I think that's about right actually. Now with this I'll tape the last corner up, just help us to hold it all together, because I'll solder it from the inside. So I've got the basic box together properly, but I just need to hold the lid down. So I'll just check we've got it square. Some flux in the last corner and along the back of the lid, and we'll see if we can get that together. It's quite an awkward shape to hold together really, just because of all the angles on it. I think that's got it, yeah. The next thing to put on this hatch is this very fine piece of brass, which is the dogs. These were the locking bolts, if you like, that held the hatch down. And they're very fine on these Pontos parts. When they're laid flat like this, that was the open state, and when they were locked you lifted the dog up and screwed it down. So I'm going to have this hatch open, I think, and I'll leave the dogs as they are. So I'll just attach it with a spot of super glue. This is thin CA. So if I change my mind and decide to have the hatch closed, I'll just have to fold these dogs up, and the hatch lid is this part here. I think it might just look a bit more interesting if I have it slightly open. This particular hatch fits here at the back, and the hole is already open up in the deck, so we will be able to see down through that hole, so we can have this hatch lid open, I think. I'll paint the interior of this structure black, so it'll make sure that no light comes up. So yeah, I think I'll go ahead and do that in an open condition. While I'm waiting for that hatch lid just to set, I'll add the hatch surround to the deck. I'll just have to check which way this hatch fits. I imagine that it fits with the opening aft. I think it is generally the case that openings on ships, doors, hatches and so on always faced away from the weather. I'm guessing it goes like that, but I'll just have to check that. That's adds a bit of interest, I think, having one of the hatches open. This is another hatch part, and I think this is going to be quite tricky because it needs to be bent in this curve shape. So this piece here follows the curve. So we have basically a doorway, and presumably there would be a ladder inside that to go down into the deck below. But we're going to have to bend this curve to match the outline here. And I think in a situation like this, what works for me at any rate is to use one of the curves as a reference for the bend. So I'll put that one side up into position like that, and then I can gradually bend and roll this top part around. I think actually that's a bit too stiff to bend easily, so I'll just anneal it. So hopefully that'll take a bit of the spring out of this. So obviously that's overdone, but I can now just go back and straighten it up a little bit, and that's not too bad. So what I'm going to try and do here is get the bottom fixed on both sides, and then I can adjust the rest of the fit afterwards. But there's no doubt this is an awkward piece to get together. Okay, I think I've managed that. I've got quite a lot of solder in there, but these parts just up here are quite fragile, so I did want to make sure that they were properly fixed. Just clean up the edges a little bit. So that's quite a tricky part to put together, really, and you do need the tape to hold it all together, I think, and just be careful of these very narrow strips of brass, otherwise they'll bend. But I'm pretty happy with how that's come out, really. It could have been a lot worse. This hatchway fits on the back here, so we've got a hole in the trumpeter deck again. So again, I think I might have that open. There's a door which fits onto the side like that, so I can have that open. And then there's this part here which is again going to be curved, and that just matches the top of the hatch like that. So just introduce a bit of a bend on it, and it should conform more or less to the top. So I'll put that in place, just slide it back a little bit, and then I'll put the door on. So again, that's adds a bit of interest. After doing that one, the rest are quite a bit more straightforward, I think. This is a vent, an engine room vent presumably. Again, we'll use some tape. It's so much easier holding the parts together. You can see exactly how it's going to finish up once you've applied the solder. So it just gives you the confidence to go in and get the thing soldered up, knowing that when it's all cooled down, everything's going to be in line. I do want to be a bit careful with this though, because it'll be easy to flood the grill detail on this, which would spoil it obviously, so I don't want to do that. I'll just tack it down at the bottom where there's no grill. So if you get the flux into the grill detail, the solder will flow along where you've got the flux, and it'll go into the grill. So stay away from that. Okay, so that's come out all right. I'll do these last two off camera. They're very straightforward and exactly the same process as we've used before, so I'll get those made up. So these parts are the last ones that I'm going to do in this particular video. And I'm not that keen on them really. This one's not so bad. It just folds 4 ways just to thicken the brass. So I can go with that one, but this Pontos want us to fold or bend these 2 very thin strips around the perimeter of this shape, which to me that's just a ridiculous sort of proposition really. So what I'm going to do is I'll just take the shape of the sides and I'll just fill that with some styrene at the thickness of this strip, and that'll just give a much neater result. It would take an enormous amount of soldering skill to be able to accurately solder this together, and it's certainly beyond me at this stage, so I'm going to use some styrene for that and I'll get a much better result. We'll just get this one out of the way first though. So we have, as I said, a 4-way bend. It folds in half first of all, and then these sides come up. So basically we have a shape a bit like an umbrella handle, and that's easy enough to solder. We just put a strip down the back and I can seal that join with solder. We'll clean it all up afterwards. Basically just run all the way around the edge and then just give it a good clean up, and we shouldn't really be able to see the joins of the 4 layers, I hope. Okay, so that's alright, that'll look like one piece when it's painted up. So this one, I'll just break off the 2 sides. So I'll probably use a couple of layers of this thickness. And it doesn't matter at all about this being a little bit messy at this stage, it'll clean up. The important thing is to get the brass filled. And I'll just cut roughly around the edge of that because I want to make sure that the other piece of brass fits perfectly on top of that. So we'll add another layer just to get the correct thickness. So we've got 2 layers of styrene in there. So obviously it would have been more ideal to have the correct thickness of styrene rather than have to laminate it, but it's not a big deal to do it like that. Hopefully they're aligned, and when I come to sand the excess styrene away, hopefully we should have something that looks like Pontos intended. Okay, so there we are. That's a bit of a sandwich really, but I couldn't have got that brass to look like that at all. The only advantage of the Pontos part is that there's a hole. When you form it, you would have a hole at the bottom here, but I don't know whether that's that important really. So I'm much happier with that. Okay, so that's all the deck parts for this superstructure. So I'll get some photographs of this assembly in the raw, if you like, some close-ups so you can see the detail of that. Then we'll get it primed and we'll go over to the ship and see what it looks like on the ship, and particularly how this forward part, this funnel base, fits as well. Okay, so the assembly has gone in pretty well there. It's a nice flush fit to the quarterdeck. The forecastle brake is nice and tight as well, and the important thing is that the funnel base is sitting nice and flat on the forecastle deck and the deck of this structure that we've just built this week. So that'll make the painting of all these assemblies that much easier. I'm not going to have to be doing any touch-ups and filling as we come to put all these together. So we'll say that that's job done for this particular episode. Next week I'm going to be moving ahead and doing the detail work on the bridge. I only got so far with it in the episode where I built the base structure, but there's splinter shields, railings and other bits of equipment to fit on the bridge. So I'll be doing that in part 7, which will be coming up as usual on Friday night at 8 o'clock. I'll also be doing a bit more work on the Vulcan this week. I've got the decals on, they're nice and dry, and I'll be doing the weathering on that and then the top coat of varnish, so we'll be able to move on after that and get the detail parts, particularly the undercarriage, sorted out, and hopefully bring that build to a conclusion over the next week or two. But as far as the Corvette build goes, part 8 will be coming up, as I said, on Friday night at the usual time, 8 o'clock, so I hope to see you for that. In the meantime, everybody, look after yourselves, stay safe, and I'll see you in another 7 days. Bye for now.